By bringing developers and security together, you don't have to choose between speed and security. Develop fast, stay secure.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Cloud Security Podcast. Today, we're talking about cloud security assessments for AWS. Yes, this is the Offensive Security Month, which is part of the Black Hat and DEF CON series that we're running, because we are going to be there at the event. So if you're there, definitely come and say hello. But for today's episode, I have a fellow Pentester AWS person and a fellow community member who's been contributing into the cloud security space for a long time. And I'm really proud to call him a friend as well. So let me just bring him on the line. Hey, Toni, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem, man. I think your second time here on the podcast as well. So I'm looking forward to having this conversation from a different perspective. Last time we kind of spoke about incident response. Today we're talking about cloud security assessment because you have a tool which is very popular. But before we get into any of that, can you share a bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Well, I've been in security pretty much my whole life, my whole professional life, 25 years or so. In the last years, I started Prowler actually in 2016 was the first release. I guess most people that is using Prowler knows me because I used to send so many code changes. Yeah. Now we have a team and is the team also managing most of the code. But yeah, growing with Prowler and doing security for the cloud since 2013 probably. I started with AWS before VPCs. VPCs were something. The cloud is a little bit more secure now.
And that's why we need something like Prowler. And by the way, what is Prowler for people who probably do not even know what Prowler is?
Prowler is an open source tool that allows you to do security assessments and audits to your AWS infrastructure, GCP infrastructure, and Azure as well.
I think this is probably an interesting one as well, because a lot of people kind of get confused when people say cloud security assessment. What does it really mean when people say cloud security assessment? What are they trying to do?
Well, you have your cloud infrastructure in whatever of the main providers, the major providers. In some cases, or most cases, you don't really know what you have because you have a console, a web console. You have to go through many different pages. Unless you are an expert, you don't know what you have. So in many cases, you need to run something and get insights about what you have and how it is configured.
Yeah.
And with Prowler, you can get that if you need to do just security assessments or even an inventory of what you have or an audit. Going beyond that, if you want to do a white box pen testing, you can do that as well. Even is very helpful for incident response or for compliance because you can see if the status of the configuration of your infrastructure complies with a given framework. So we support so many different security frameworks from CIS, which is our baseline, to HIPAA, FedRAMP, you name it.
Also, there's an interesting story why Prowler is called Prowler as well, right? Why was it called Prowler?
It's almost here. What is it?
Iron Maiden.
Prowler is the first song of the first album of Iron Maiden, which is my favorite band. I love heavy metal. So that is why Prowler has that name. And also, we try every new version is Iron Maiden song and has some meaning with that release. So I used to write some words about that song and why that is the name of this version. It's like the version and the song.
That's why I love open source from a perspective, because you can name whatever you want. I love the fact that you choose your favorite band songs as the release version. So and talking about releases as well, web app pen testing and cloud security assessment or cloud pen testing. People use these terms in the same context and can make it a bit confusing. How do you describe these terms?
Well, actually, if you want to cover the whole stack, you have to go pretty much everything now with web app, right? So but the web app is on top of your whole infrastructure. And the infrastructure is no longer just one server running outside, but it's a lot of things. Can be serverless, can be so many different things, right? Buckets, whatever. So if you want to cover the whole stack, you have to cover, of course, also the application side.
Feel that, and it's kind of where it's different for me as well, because I feel like most pen testing has been primarily coming from top down, which is basically looking at the website or SQL injection, cross-site scripting, whatever. What's the thing over here? Whereas where Prowler and similar kind of cloud security assessment kind of comes in is kind of bottom up, where Now you have that application is not just in one place. It may be a bulletproof application with no SQL injection or anything. The other avenue that opens up that point in time is the infrastructure layer with the secrets in there, or to your point, maybe use Kubernetes, Azure, Google Cloud, whatever else maybe using, but that's scaled across multiple locations, which kind of is a good thing and a bad thing, because if it's scaled across a lot of cloud environments, and it's hard to kind of keep a track of. And to me, that's kind of where the value of cloud security assessment is. And I think that's kind of where I'm hoping at least this conversation with Prowler and what as an open source people can actually have the option of doing, where they don't have to go for a paid CSPM. Well, what's I calling out? Like, I think would a Prowler be a good point to start assessment? Like someone who basically, imagine I am a architect or engineer, have no clue what I have in front of me at this point in time. I don't have an expensive CSPM to give me visibility. Like, would I be able to just use Prowler to get some visibility on what I have? Or is that just straight into like assessment for compliance? What's my stand there?
Well, the point is, as I said at the beginning, sometimes you are building applications in the cloud because at the end of the day, everything that we build in the cloud is for something, right? A workload, a web application, or whatever that we need to automate or create. You are using so many different services that, depending on the provider, each service has some security features that you have to take into account. And with this, the shared responsibility model comes on the table, because what we always said is, if you can configure it, it's your responsibility, right? So if you miss to configure something that is important for security, let's leave compliance on a side so far. But if it's important for security, like encryption at rest, or use the proper cipher suites in your load balancers, things like that, Prowler is going to tell you. That is for security assessment. I mean, actually, I have a GitHub repo with my arsenal of AWS security tools, with many different tools and libraries that I always recommend everybody to go through that, of course, including Prowler, but any other tool is always a good option.
The tooling is interesting from so to your point about there are many tools and Prowler that can be used to bring visibility. Is there any basic, like from a starting point perspective, where does one even start? Like, and obviously we're doing a whole another episode on the whole walkthrough of how can someone use Prowler for an AWS assessment, so that people can actually cement in the fact that, oh, this is how it would work in a practical sense, instead of just having a conversation about it. What are some of the low-hanging fruits people can start with? Because, like, say, for example, they watch the second episode where they see the walkthrough of Prowler, scanning an AWS environment, and maybe scaling that across into multiple AWS accounts. What is a low-hanging fruit that you find is a good one to start off with in AWS?
For us, so I would say two things. First, something that we consider low-hanging fruit and very good as a baseline in terms of security is the CIS, Center for Internet Security benchmarks. Okay. Which is what we have in AWS, different versions of the CIS benchmark for AWS. We have the same for GCP, and we are working on that for Azure. So the low-hanging fruit could be the level 1 of CIS. The low-hanging fruit at the same time is the high and critical severity findings. So the first thing that you have to do when you run Prowler is run Prowler out of the box. It's going to be for AWS, almost 300 checks. For GCP, 73, which is the CIS. But for AWS, we have almost 300. You run it, and you are going to get some different output files. CSV, if you want to do your own Excel hacks, or also an HTML, and many other type of files that we can discuss later if you want to. But you go there, you filter by high or critical severity, and everything that is failing there is what you have to fix. Full stop. That is the most important part. Actually, when it comes to incident response, we have so many different users that when they have an incident, they run Prowler to take a snapshot of their account or accounts and see what is the critical severity. And in many cases, the critical severity has been the attack vector or the source of the problem. And remember, out of the box, Prowler goes through all the regions that you have enabled, and you have permissions to read, because in some cases people has service control policies denying access to regions. But and this is very important when it comes to all the use cases of Prowler: audits, hardening, compliance, incident response. To go always, if you don't know what to do, always run out of the box. because this is going to be the broadest number of checks, go through all the regions. That is for the case of AWS. You can run also Prowler across multiple accounts based on your organizations.
Yep.
But for GCP, you can do the same for projects. Remember, in GCP, you have one or multiple projects, and
Yep.
Prowler can run out of the box through all your projects. And also for subscriptions, I think is the name for Azure, can be through just one subscription or multiple subscriptions, which is, again, what you have to do when you don't know what to do. Go through everything.
And do you find that, like, you know how a lot of people, when they kind of go down the open source journey as well, one thing to call out is that it can lead them down a path where there's a lot of alerts. And we kind of were talking about this offline as well. The whole security group open to port 22, where boards they're attached to, and like when you start off by scanning, so let's just take the example of one AWS account, right? If you were to just do an assessment of one AWS account using Prowler, you say get a CIS benchmark listed. You probably get the fact that, hey, you're not using MFA, you're not using your access keys are not rotated, whatever the thing may be. At that point in time, is there a challenge of having too much information in the beginning, and how do people kind of deal with it? It's usually the approach there.
Yeah, actually, I would say that is a problem, but it's a good problem to have. It's because and we have so many users. Remember, we pass 5 million downloads. We have thousands of downloads every day, and good feedback. Every day we have new issues or new comments or questions from the community, and we get feedback. And for us, that is gold, actually. One of the feedback that we have the most is about the noise. Sometimes you have so many low severity findings that probably nobody is going to do anything wrong with that. It's just something that somebody says that is important, or not somebody, but it's the shared responsibility model says that if you can configure it, you can do it. But to solve that in Prowler, we have done so far one very important thing, which is to create an allow list. So you can configure that allow list based on accounts, resources, tags, checks. So for example, if you don't want a particular check to be important for you, you can add it to the allow list. If you don't want specific resources with a given tag, you can add that to the allow list. And Prowler is going to create way less noise on that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's better to have a false positive than a false negative, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I understand like Prowler that we have so many checks creates out of the box so much noise, and it's fine, but we are working on that. As I said, with the allow list, it's a very comprehensive feature that we have there with the allow list, and I always recommend people to give it a look. And also at the same time, we are working on understanding the relationship between the findings. Let me put an example here, and again, we are working on this. This is not just developed, but this is in our roadmap. So for example, Prowler finds like a high severity, a security group open to the port 22 SSH. That is following CIS and following so many different security frameworks. That is bad, right? But what happens if that security group is not in use? It's not attached to anything. Is that a problem? It's less than a problem, but can still be a problem because a criminal resource may use eventually target task, an EC2 instance, whatever. But even if that security group that is misconfigured because it has a port 82 open to the internet is attached to an instance, but that instance doesn't have the port open for whatever reason, that is not a problem or shouldn't be a problem. If that instance has the port open and has a very secure SSH because it's the latest version of whatever, it's less than a problem, but still a bit of a problem. But what if that instance is like an Ubuntu from 2015 with a very old SSH, and you can hack that port and get a privilege escalation, whatever? That is a very big problem. So understanding that flow of the recon part of your pen testing is important. And also, once you have access to the port, do something else. So we are thinking about to trigger things like Nmap just to do a recon, or other things like Nuclei. For example, Nuclei is a wonderful app or a tool to do pen testing or to automate some pen testing for low-hanging fruit, and not that low-hanging fruit, but things like that are going to help us also to go beyond just row finding to something more advanced and tells you, hey, this is actually bad thing.
And talking about automation as well, most people are automating because they want to scale it to multiple AWS accounts, I imagine. How does it kind of function in that context where you're trying to just scale it across not just one account, but most people these days have more than one account thanks to the multi-account structure that's been recommended from AWS. How does it kind of scale out to multiple accounts?
In Prowler, it's very, very easy. Out of the box, we run one account. If you run Prowler with your credentials, it goes through that credentials account and all the regions. But you can tell Prowler, hey, this is my organization's management account. Get all the accounts from there and scan all those accounts using this profile. So I'm probably going to assume a profile or a role on those accounts. All that stuff is in our documentation. It's pretty straightforward. And scan all those accounts. Or you can give Prowler named accounts. And that's all.
Interesting. Wait, so maybe this is a good time for me to introduce the second part of the episode, which is the walkthrough of it as well. I would love to just set the context for everyone. We would like to do a walkthrough of a security assessment of an AWS account using Prowler, what that would look like. And I think you have a 15-minute demo which you want to show at Black Hat Arsenal tool as well. With that set in mind, and so in this part of the episode, we're covering the security assessment. How would you do a security assessment for AWS account using Prowler?
For doing that, let me, this is also very important for the audience because we have here the GitHub project and here the documentation, the documentation portal of Prowler where you can get everything for all the providers, how to configure the authentication, etc. So I'm going to skip the authentication part, but we have here in permissions, you can see CloudFormation template, for example, to create permissions in AWS, and or GCP or Azure, you have also in the documentation what you have to do. It's pretty straightforward, but it's sometimes is the first thing that you have to do.
Yeah.
I'm going to skip it for the sake of the demo, okay?
I appreciate that, yeah, thank you.
So now that you have the proper permissions, in this case for AWS, like the view only security audit, and a few other permissions that are related to list and get information from some new services is what Prowler needs in most cases.
And so, to put some context as well, we are pretending that you are a pen tester or you are a cloud practitioner who's basically trying to do an assessment of their AWS account. That's the context for people who are watching this.
Exactly. You have one account. In this case, we are going to do it for one account. And the documentation, you can go here in tutorials. You see here like using organizations, multiple accounts with organizations, with regions, partitions. Remember, Prowler is mostly used for the commercial partitions, but can be used also for China, for GovCloud, or top secrets partitions. Okay.
Oh wow. Okay.
Actually, today there is a new region, and Prowler now supports that new region as well.
Oh wow. There you go.
What's the new region? Israel.
Israel. Oh right. I didn't know Israel has a region. There you go. Cool, man.
Yep, they have a new region starting today. We know that because we monitor their regions JSON. They have a JSON with all the services per region. So, and we have action to get to know that.
There you go. Wow. That's pretty awesome, man. Cool.
Okay, so now that you have the credentials, like in your profile or in your environment variables, you can, first of all, of course, install Prowler if you have PIP at least 3.9, PIP, install Prowler, and that's all. You don't have to do anything else. Okay, this is the latest one. Okay, if you don't have the latest one, Prowler is going to tell you, hey, get the latest one. Now, it's so easy. You can just do Prowler AWS, and that's all. When you don't specify anything else, Prowler is going to go through your account, the credentials of your account. In this case, I'm using an administrator credentials for the demo, okay? It's going to run 83 checks. This is going to take more or less time depending on my internet connection and how good or bad are performing the different regions and the different APIs. So right now, Prowler, what it's doing is going in parallel, so going sequentially by service and in parallel by region.
Oh, wow.
And this is possible in AWS because both of three allows you to do so. In GCP, it's not that easy because their library doesn't allow you to do that way. So it's a little bit slower in some parts. But
Right. So wait, so the Water 3, and this is kind of goes back to the automation thing you were talking about for pen testers. They can have, so at the moment, Prowler does 283, but if they had their own test set that they wanted to add onto, like, so while this is running, they can also have Water 3 run more just in parallel kind of a thing, or can that be included in Prowler?
well, in this case, what it is running all the checks. Of course, I
Okay.
could add, hey, run only CIS, run only HIPAA, runs only. But so in the meantime, so this is going to take, actually, if I move this lower, this is going to take a couple of minutes or 3 minutes, depending on the how big is the account, etc. But if you want to, let me show you something that is important for the audience, which is how the checks are actually written and how is everything in the repo.
Yeah.
So there are two important things in Prowler: the checks and the compliance frameworks.
Yeah.
The checks are here inside Prowler, providers. You have, let's say, AWS, Azure, common libraries, and GCP. So far, let me go to AWS, the common libraries, and services. And in services, you have, of course, one per service. Let me show you, for example, CloudFront and the check that says, hey, let's make sure that HTTPS is enabled.
Mm-hmm.
So every single check has two files. Is the metadata JSON, which is the file that defines all the metadata that is going to be also part of the finding,
Yep.
or part of the logic of the check. So we have here the check ID, the provider, the severity. So you can write your own. If there is some remediation from Termicro, Blitzcrew, or whatever, so we give you the remediation for CloudFormation, for Terraform, or whatever. Or even if there is a CLI, see, in this case, the CLI to fix this is in this URL,
Right.
recommendations or categories. And then the code, the Python code. So we have service library per service. And then with the check, basically what we are doing is parsing or filtering the results,
Yeah.
making it so easy to write your own checks.
Mm.
Actually, we are using Boto 3 for AWS, but you can use your own libraries if you want to check something different. And we are aware of some community users doing those things. Like eventually, if you want to do a check that doesn't use Boto 3 but uses a different library, you can do that as well. That is for the checks. But also, if you want to go through providers, if you want to go through compliance, we have in AWS one JSON per compliance framework. So, for example, let's say that you are interested on knowing the MITRE attack framework, the mapping of the MITRE. So you can see here, okay, the MITRE attack for AWS, the description, and every framework, security framework has their own requirements. And one requirement can be one check of Prowler or multiple checks. That is how we map requirements.
Right.
See, for example, the name, the tactics, the subtechnics, if there are platforms, description, and the checks that applies to this technique. In this case, and the attributes for HIPAA, but we can do also PCI. It has its own attributes, or something that most people is going to be with CIS, for example. This is the latest CIS for AWS 2.0,
Right.
which is pretty much like 1.5. It has its own attributes, see, section, profile, etc. That is very helpful also because there are some countries like Spain or Germany or Brazil that they have their own in their own language. So you don't have to do everything. Yeah, because the attributes are your custom attributes per requirements, is because the requirement. So let's say that one of the requirements of your regulation is encryption. Encryption are so many checks in Prowler, right?
Yeah.
So you can add those checks. In this case, it's for MFA. But if you have multiple checks for encryption, you can add all the checks there. And Prowler is going to give you a CSV with the mapping and with all those attributes and the output of the check. So you can say, okay, this is pass or fail, depending on if it fits with all the checks related to that requirement.
Right. And how does it come back to the multi-language thing? Because you know how you were saying Brazil may have their own test or
because you can have inside the attributes, which is the visible part in the CSV.
Yeah.
In the attributes, you can have your own attributes in your own language.
Because
at the end of the day,
yeah,
every country has their own regulation. Let's say, so for example, I'm very familiar with how Spain works in that regard. They have a law written down with all the requirements, and and every requirement has some specific attributes because it's important for them. And you can map that here, and then you can create a report based on what the regulation says, not just because one Prowler check says this is important. It's because the regulation says that it's important. The difference.
Interesting. Yeah. So and can you write this in Spanish as well? I mean, it's not Spanish, it's different from English, but I guess.
Actually, I have here. This is the ENS. This is in Spain. This is in Spanish because the ENS is National Security Scheme.
Right.
See, this is Marco is framework. Operational, category, description, level, type. And then with this output, we generate a CSV that helps you to generate a report.
In your language.
In your language, exactly.
Wow, man. It's fun. It's funny, man. I think because from where it started to where it is now, it's come such a long way to be multilingual as well now as an open source tool. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah. When we defined how it was going to be Prowler 3, remember that we rewrote everything in Python in Prowler 3. We also defined how to create compliance frameworks because at the end of the day, in the other version, in Prowler 2, we had just one bash file with mapping checks, but the practitioner at the end of the day has specific requirements when it comes to security compliance, and that is not always a check. Actually, in CIS, you have manual checks, which means that there is not a Prowler check or whatever other.
That's right.
Check. But it's still a requirement. So if you are a practitioner and you are running CIS or you are running even the ENS for Spain, we are telling you, hey, you have to do this manually. This is not going to give you, we are not going to give you the result with Prowler. And that helps to the practitioner or the auditor when it comes to using Prowler, giving you the result of the automated check or requirement, but also telling you, hey, you have to do this manually.
And can people add more in here? Like, or would that be just a GitHub?
Totally. So this is why we did it this way. So most of these ones have been done by our team, but some others are the community. The community is adding for example, the HIPAA or the ISO 27001, the MITRE, all that stuff was some of them done by the community. And if you need one for your country or for your company, you can do it as well. Actually, AWS contributed back to us doing the well-architected framework reliability pillar and security pillar. That has been contributed from AWS, and this is very helpful as well.
And what about the control tower one right on the top? So is that the same guardrails that are there in control tower that just...
Exactly. This is to see if you have the guardrails set up in control tower. And this is not... some of the checks are empty because there are no checks for that, or some others is, okay, you have to have EBS, the full encryption. This also was provided by the community, and the foundational best practices. This is what you get from Security Hub, for example. You can run it also from Prowler.
Right. Also, to your point, then I think the use case that I'm listening as I'm kind of going through this is that if there's a scenario that they're trying to cover from a perspective of whether it's your CIS benchmark or AWS Security Best Practice Foundation or Security Pillar, they can use this automation to get the result faster and do that across multiple accounts, because I don't think that there is a quote unquote cloud native way to do this across the board. Like the security pillar checks, that's very manual at this point in time. There's no, I mean, this is the only automation that I know of it.
Yeah, well, the security pillar has some automated checks and some not automated checks. Is for example, one recommendation here is the account has to be part of the organizations.
So you were saying about what I was trying to talk about, AWS security pillar doesn't really have any automated checks primarily. They at least the way they were running was, I walk into a room, say for example, any consulting that I'm doing where I'm doing a well-architected review, security pillar, I walk in, ask a bunch of questions, and then go, oh, I guess this is what I recommend, and I walk out. But the fact that you have a check for it, which makes it really interesting. So has that been automated as well? Is that what this is?
Yeah, the point is, with the well-architected framework, like many other ways to assess things in AWS, few of these methodologies are conversational, right? If I'm assessing your company, I'm asking you questions. Hey, do you have your incident response procedure written down somewhere? You say yes. Okay. I say, is important encryption for you because you have to be compliant with PCI? And you say, yes. So you can say whatever, but at the same time, we can say, okay, I'm going to help you now to back your responses. And for that, if I can get context of those questions, I'm going to get them from your infrastructure using Prowler.
Yeah.
So in that case, is okay. Are you using organizations and using service control policies and all that stuff? And you say yes. And you run Prowler across the whole organization, and you figure out that there are accounts that are not part of the organization, that are not protected by SCPs. And then you are helping the customer saying, hey, do this or that, because the reality is not actually what you are saying. And it's not because they are lying. It's because they, in most cases, in my experience, doing hundreds of assessments, it's because they have no clue about that.
That makes sense as well. So you can use this as a evidence as well to validate that what you're saying is actually true as well.
Supporting tool, actually. So like the guardrail for account part of organizations. If you have MFA enabled, you say that happens also very often. For a production account, it's highly recommended to have MFA. And they say, yes, I have MFA because the technician or the architect did that. But you run it and you said, no, the production account is not with MFA. That happens also very often. That is why I said it's a supportive way for a conversation.
This is very interesting because I think so. Going back to the audience that are watching this, they either are doing an assessment on the security pillar, reliability pillar, foundation, control tower guardrails, or they have their own CIS benchmark that they're trying to map. Maybe even the Spanish regulation as well, they're trying to work towards as well. They can use Prowler as a way to identify how compliant they are to that. But the other one that you were showing us before, which was, I think if you kind of go back to your AWS, which is the 283 checks, I think you had, provider checks at the bottom.
So if you, in providers, what we have are just the checks based on services. So that's why I mean, the compliance frameworks is a way to map a framework requirement with Prowler checks.
Right. And how would this tie in together? Because I think where I'm thinking is actually, you know how the scan that we started is a everything scan at the moment. So would that be going, okay, I'm going to look at the checks against each service. I'm also going to look at CIS benchmark. I'm also going to look at, so is that going to combine the results of the two? Or is that going to be like two sets of results? One for, hey, I've looked at all your resources and this is what I found. Oh, by the way, I did a CIS benchmark test, and am I getting a combination of the two, or would this just pick one for me?
Very good point, Ashish, and thanks for asking this question because it's often we see that our users don't know this. So you have two options. So the first thing, as what we ran at the beginning was Prowler AWS, and you get an overview of the results. 44% fail, 54% passed, and here an overview of what has happened based on severity. So good thing here is we don't have any critical. We have 2 critical for IAM. 10. So in here you can see, okay, this is what I have to do now. So if you run this to a customer, you know how long are you going to be working to harden this account, for example. But with this is overall information, and you have all this information in HTML, OCSF JSON, and CSV and a JSON. This is the new standard, okay? For also Amazon Security Lake, Splunk, and many other tools. So let me open just this for so far, the HTML, which is not going to show all the metadata of a finding, but the most important ones for a quick assessment. Open this, and I have here the assessment overview, etc. And you can see this metadata and the compliance framework that belongs to this check. But at the same time, you don't see here all the attributes, specific attributes for the compliance framework. But you can see here quickly, for example, if you go to filters and you go to critical fail, which are only 2, I see I don't have MFA enabled in this account, and that applies to all these frameworks, see? And I don't have also hardware MFA or software MFA. This is MFA in general and hardware MFA, because some security frameworks ask you to have specifically hardware MFA. Okay, so you have here. But what happens if you want to run Prowler and you only care the specific checks for a specific compliance framework or multiple compliance framework. You can do this. You can go to Prowler here, and you can run Prowler list compliance. And here we are going to see all the frameworks that we support for, in this case, for AWS.
Yes.
If you want to list the requirements, which is what we saw in the JSON, you can do Prowler AWS list compliance requirements. Let's say ISO 27000.
Yep.
And you are going to see the output of the JSON nicely, to see it without the attributes, but just to see, okay, this requirement of the ISO is going to be password policy. This is avoid the root account, avoid root usage, things like that. Okay.
Yeah.
If you want to see quickly what is required, compliance requirement. And now, if you want to run just the CIS, let's say Prowler for the CIS, and I want to run Prowler for, I think I have it up here, for the ENS, okay, the Spanish regulation. I can run it like this. I can add as many as I want.
Oh.
This is going to run Prowler through all the checks in those requirements.
Yep.
It's going to give you regular results as the HTML we saw, the CSV, the JSON, but additionally a CSV of those specific frameworks.
Oh, right. Okay. So give me both. Yeah, depending on how the person wants it. It's almost like a Swiss knife, where you can use it for whatever you wanted.
Yeah, we try to give the flexibility of running everything or running only what you need to run. And remember, we are running everything manually here. But of course, if you want continuous monitoring or continuous assessment, you can add this into Kubernetes, into a Target task, or in a cron job, in a EC2 instance, whatever.
Yeah, and I think,
and in minutes, so in 4 minutes, 5 minutes, you have everything sorted out.
Interesting. And to your point, then, because another question that people and normally hesitate themselves with is that, what's a skill set do I need to be able to do this? And in terms of to be able to use this, make sense out of it as well. Doesn't sound like you need to be like at least you don't have to be a pen testing expert or a cloud security expert to run Prowler. What do you consider as a skill level people should have when they think about going down the path of using Prowler?
Well, to be honest, I think if we follow the expertise level that AWS uses, I think Prowler is a 200.
Okay, right.
It's a 200.
And
I mean, it's basic medium level.
Right, because for context of people who probably would not even know what level 100 to 500 is, how would you define that people like you and I would know from an AWS perspective, but others might not. So how would you describe 100, 200?
100 is user level, very, very basic. 200 is basic, 300 medium advanced, and 400 could be expert, right? So Prowler will be at 200 in terms of, so just if you know how to install a PIP package in Python, you have to have some knowledge on how to use the CLI in your
AWS CLI,
Windows, Linux, or Mac.
Yeah.
Because now Prowler is multi-platform.
All right, so you can use Windows and Mac as well.
Yeah. You can run Prowler pretty much from a Raspberry Pi if you want to.
Oh, wow. And just run it in a continuous mode as well. That's pretty awesome. Okay, so level 200 kind of knowledge. So AWS CLI, information knowledge, at least understanding of services like AWS services that they would want to cover. Out of curiosity, there might be services that are used by people which are specific for their industry, which may not be as common as the wide internet, right? Because there's almost 300 plus services on AWS. If there was a service that's not currently covered, what's the option there? Can they extend that on Prowler?
Yeah, we cover the most important services across all the providers.
Yeah.
But if you want to cover a service that is not in Prowler, you can write following the existing ones as examples. It's very straightforward. Basically, in Boto3 for AWS, in Boto3 you can do it with the existing libraries. Boto3 is a very good piece of software, I can tell you, compared to how Google or Microsoft are managing the access over their APIs.
Yeah,
I can say that Boto3 is by far the most comfortable one, I would say. Because it's very flexible, and you have to go just with Boto3. It's not like Azure that you have to download so many different things depending on the service.
And what about Google Cloud? Is that similar as well for Google Cloud?
Google Cloud has only one library that you have to use. Actually, if you go here to Prowler, the repo, you can see all the libraries that we use in the pipe project.
Yeah.
So for Azure, look, you have to get all this stuff.
Oh, wow.
For AWS, Boto 3 and Boto Core.
Yeah.
And for Google, the Google API Python client. And for GCP there are some things that I think I mentioned before that, for example, all the calls are not region-based. So it goes to all the regions. So you can, probably we don't parallel by region like we do in AWS. And also the calls are async. For example, you create the call and then you run the call. So you define the action that you want to do or the call, and then you run the call. In Boto 3, everything is easier, in my opinion. And in Azure, it's a pain.
Well, no wonder people talk about Azure automation as much as I'm sure there's a version out there as well. But I guess where I'm coming from is this is good intro into that as well, because you wanted to show the result as well.
Yeah. Let me go back here. So now remember, we run CIS and we run the ENS. And for CIS, see, I get results of whatever I find, because in Prowler, in the results, we show only what you have. So you don't have something that belongs to one of particular section, we don't show you the section. Okay, but it's going. And for the ENS, also see that is in Spanish in this case.
Yeah.
So for example, let's open the CIS because it's in English. So we get the CIS down here. So I can open it here. Let me show you. This is opening right here. Yeah.
All right.
See, so we have the provider, the description, the account, the region, the assessment date, requirement ID. This is now part only from the compliance requirement. It's not only for the check itself. So I'm telling you here what requirements, description, sections, etc., attributes description, requirements. I mean, this is the really rational statement, impact statement, remediation procedure, everything that CIS tells you to do per check. If it has additional information, references, the status, this is the actual status from Prowler check. The status extended, the resource ID, and the check that gives you, the Prowler check that gives you that output based on the requirement. So in this case, you get the best from both worlds, right? The check itself and the requirement from your compliance framework that you have to follow. This is for CIS. Remember, you get one of these per compliance framework. And if I open the one from the Spanish government, is this one, you get the same,
but in Spanish.
It's a little bit more complex, but it's in Spanish with whatever they need. Description, control, framework, category, and at the end, if it's a recommendation, if it's a requirement, if it's whatever they need. See, for example, here is a manual check. So you have to go through this, and there is not check ID for Prowler, it's manual check. But there are so many others that are not manual checks, are actual checks. The Lambda functions for control tower or whatever. See? Control trail.
That's awesome, man. Wait, so this is pretty useful. Obviously, we're towards the end of the episode as well. For the audience, what would be the use case for them to start using Prowler for, hey, if I come across this use case, I think I should use Prowler? And where can they find it is probably the two questions that I have as well.
Well, I would say probably at the beginning as well. So if you don't know what to do in your infrastructure, run Prowler, and Prowler will tell you. And you can do that based on severity of the finding. You can do that based on the framework or the security compliance framework that you have to follow in different ways. So there are multiple dimensions that are probably going to tell you, hey, this is what you have to do. Let's say that you are a fintech company. Probably you have to be worried about PCI, even if you don't have to be PCI compliant because you are using Stripe or whatever else. But you have to be, you can run Prowler with PCI and see what is PCI telling you, and based on the severity of those findings, start working on that. And remember, Prowler is going to tell you also how to fix that using Terraform or using CloudFormation. So that is not only going to tell you to give you the fish, but how to fish, you know?
I love that. Awesome. I'll leave the link for Prowler in the show notes as well. But this was really awesome, man. Thanks so much for coming on the show as well. And I would put your link as well so that people can connect with you after this to talk about how they can do maybe ad assessments or run this as well. But thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate this.
Thanks, Ashish. Thanks for having me and to give me the opportunity to show what we are doing with Prowler. Thanks.
No, awesome, man. Well, always happy to have a friend over. So awesome. Thank you so much for doing this, and I'll see you soon, man. Thanks, man. Thanks everyone else for watching.